STEM Colloquium series in education. And we have, so this series is made possible by our Barnard Noyce Scholars grant from Noyce NSF. And it's really an interesting series where we get to talk about issues in STEM education, thinking about STEM education broadly, K-12 and into college. And we also have a course attached to it. So it just so turns out that most of the people in the course are sitting on one side of the room. It doesn't have to be that way. But some people are here tonight because everybody's here tonight because they want to be here. But some people are also taking this course that's made possible by our Noyce Scholars program. Our Noyce Scholars program is a special program that we have at Barnard that allows us to prepare teachers for STEM-focused teaching careers. So some of our Noyce Scholars are here too, which we're excited about. And Professor Rivera, who will be leading tonight's session, is the primary investigator or the lead on our Noyce Scholars program. She's been with the Barnard Education Program for quite a number of years. She is our expert in STEM education and adolescent education, generally speaking. Her research focuses on science teachers, and we're super excited to have her bring tonight one of the projects that came out of one of the courses that she teaches, called Science in the City. And from there, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Maria Rivera and let her tell you all about what we're doing tonight.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lisa. So just as our warm-up, because we got to have a warm-up, where do you see evidence of engineering in the picture that's up there? So just start calling it out.
Say maybe even the cups.
The cups. Okay, the tables had to be engineered. Okay, very good. What else?
The top of
the awning. The awning. Okay, so that was definitely engineered. What else? The plates.
Water dispenser.
The water dispensers. Okay. The slides.
Is that child with a stroller or?
A stroller. We've got a stroller here. Yes, that was engineered. What else? The balloons. The sunglasses.
The watch.
The watch. The clothing. The food. Right? Even the food, like the whole how we make our food, that's all. So if you start thinking about it and we keep going and going, we realize that engineering is everywhere around us. It's just mostly invisible to us. And so one of the reasons why I throw this up there is for us to realize that engineering is everywhere. It's all around us. We're immersed in it, and yet we're so often unaware of all the aspects of engineering that just affect daily life. So today we're going to focus on a project where we were integrating science and engineering in elementary classrooms. And I'm really excited because I have two students who took the course in fall 2015. In addition, I also have their cooperating teachers are here. And they're from St. Charles Borromeo School, which is not too far from here. And we're going to learn about how they were integrating engineering into the science curriculum at their schools. So first of all, just a few quick acknowledgments. Funding for Science in the City is provided by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and also some extra funding by Wells Fargo. And then funding for the STEM Colloquium comes from the National Science Foundation. Program context. So I teach a course, I teach two courses actually, called Science in the City, and they're a lot of fun because the overarching theme is how can we use the city as a resource to teach science. And in one of the courses, we focus on museum education, and so we're looking at how we can use the informal science institutions of the city in order to teach science. And in this course, Science in the City 2, we focus on integrating engineering. The course enrolls in-service and pre-service teachers, and that's a kind of a unique feature of the course. When my undergraduates come into that course, they are also sitting next to actual practicing teachers, and so we learn together. As we're learning together, there's also a field component. So the pre-service teachers or the undergraduates will spend 2 periods per week in the teacher's classroom, sometimes more, to co-plan and co-teach science. And so everything we're learning in seminar, they get to apply in a real classroom setting. And we partner with public schools and private schools, local, mostly high-need schools, and it's a lot of fun. I think it's a lot of fun. All right. So these are some of our school teams, and you'll see pre-service teachers and in-service teachers working together. And in this course, there are 3 pedagogical initiatives. So the first is we want to integrate engineering design into the science curriculum, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, like why we're doing that. The second initiative is for them to plan for explanation-driven science. And this is using a particular framework. It's called the Claims, Evidence, Reasoning Framework, and I'll, again, talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The third initiative was they were going to host, and they did, in fact, all host a family engineering night at the school. So that's part of the class as well. So this talk is going to focus on the first 2 of these initiatives. So why integrate engineering? Well, first of all, we wanted to take up the call from the next generation science standards that basically says we need to integrate engineering across the K-12 curriculum. So these are the new science standards that have been adopted by many states. New York State hasn't quite adopted it yet, but New York State was one of the states that was part of the original planning committee for the next generation science standards. And they currently, where they stand with it in New York State is they're going to be looking at their existing standards, looking at the next generation science standards, and basically they want to come up with a hybrid model that takes the best from both of them. So they're not going to adopt it as is basically where they're at right now. Now, we want to provide positive experiences with engineering for kids through fun, hands-on activities, and you'll see a lot of engineering activities. You'll see that the kids do. It's a lot of fun. We want to increase awareness of and appreciation for the role of engineering in our daily lives. You saw, we're like really mostly unaware of how much engineering impacts everything from the chairs we're sitting on to the lighting in the room. So we want to introduce young people to possible careers in engineering, and we want to encourage parents. That was the whole purpose of the family engineering, was we want to encourage parents to support their children in pursuing STEM careers. So the next generation science standards came out with a set of scientific and engineering practices. And so most of us are probably very familiar with the scientific method, and we know that there's a part of the scientific method where we're asking questions, and that's in science. But in engineering, they don't just ask questions, they really define problems. And so you'll see how the kids got to define some of the problems in their engineering projects. In both scientific and engineering practices, you'll see developing and using models. You'll see planning and carrying out investigations. You'll see analyzing and interpreting data, because if you design something in engineering, you've got to test it and see if it works. They're going to be using mathematics and computational thinking. They'll be constructing explanations in science, but in engineering, they'll be designing solutions. And then we want to engage in argument from evidence. This is working. Here's why I know it's working. Here's the data that I have. And then they're going to be obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information. So these scientific practices and engineering practices are really kind of the heart of the next generation science standards. And so what we want to try to do is we want to try to take the existing science curriculum and incorporate these practices. So one of the things we also focused on was the claims, evidence, reasoning framework, because what we want students to be able to do is we want students to be able to make evidence-based arguments. Now, to make an evidence-based argument, you have to start with a claim, and then you move to evidence, and then you move to the reasoning. The reason we integrate it is because this is going to develop students' problem-solving skills, their reasoning skills, their communication skills. And when you have a framework like this, it can scaffold that whole process so the students are able to make meaning and they can really integrate the scientific concepts with what they're seeing in the real world, but also gain an understanding about how science is done. So when we're constructing a scientific argument, we're going to use claims, evidence, and justification as students are talking and learning in science. When they make a claim, it'll be a statement or conclusion that answers the original question or problem. So you have Carl Sagan telling us that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Then the evidence that they collect, this is the scientific data, okay, that support the claim. So these are their observations, these are their measurements. The data can be qualitative, it can be quantitative, and we can evaluate that evidence to see, is this appropriate evidence for the claim that I'm making? And then from there, we want students to start bringing in that scientific knowledge, okay, and reasoning with it. So this is a justification that connects the evidence to the claim, and it shows why that data counts as evidence for that particular claim. And it builds on sufficient and appropriate scientific principles. Okay, so we don't want any circular reasoning here. We want, really good scientific reasoning. Now, the engineering design process is going to take kids through this cycle here where they ask, questions about the problem. They'll imagine possible solutions to that problem. They'll come up with a plan. What are we going to design? What are we going to make to address this problem? They'll go ahead and create their designs. So they've designed something, now they're going to create it. Then they test it, and they have to improve it. And that process, they may need to go through several iterations of that process before they come up with their final project. So the two presentations we're going to see today, one is called Damn It, Flood Mitigation and Fourth Grade Engineering Design. And the second one, Science, Engineering, and Evidence-Based Learning at St. Charles, third grade classroom. So these are both, one's a third grade classroom, one's a fourth grade classroom. And so our first set of presenters are Jacob and Janis from our first group. So come on up. And I'm going to pass this along. I guess I'll pass it.
Hello, everyone. My name's Jacob.
And I'm Janis, Selby, fourth grade teacher at St. Charles Borromeo.
Yes. So our engineering design project was named Damn It, and it was about flood mitigation and about water purification. So.
Okay, we implemented a flood mitigation-based engineering design in our fourth grade classroom. And as an overview of the semester as a whole, we began with an introduction of the water cycle. And we moved into a discussion of cloud formation as a function of condensation, transition towards cloud development and weather, which led to a discussion of inclement weather and natural disasters caused by inclement weather, which was the basis of our engineering design project. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Perfect. All right, and so these, as Dr. Rivera was talking about, we were challenged to incorporate the next generation science standards into our classroom. So this is just a set of the standards specifically that we were trying to address with our design project. And so they include earth and human activity designing models, defining problems, hypothesizing multiple solutions, and carrying out quantitative tests to sort of assess how well those solutions were working or panning out long term. Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay, and here's a few of the actual social and cognitive skills we wanted the students to walk away from the unit.
Right, so we thought that not only is it important to scaffold the science skills, but we also thought that working in a fourth grade classroom, scaffolding positive interpersonal skills is also a huge aspect of making sure that the unit works well. So a lot of those interpersonal skills had to do with being able to talk about collaborating with other students, being able to use evidence that they found from reading papers. So applying previous knowledge, these were all skills that we thought would be important in our classroom. So just some background on our unit.
And so with all these goals laid out, we moved into implementing the unit. And we started by giving students a fictional backstory about a particular bad thunderstorm causing the Delaware River to flood and also causing damage to the Pepticon Reservoir where it emptied into.
Yes, and so we did a nice number of lessons on inclement weather, as we mentioned earlier, and then we started talking about flooding and then about the role of reservoirs in a hydrological system for a given area.
So in keeping with the NGSS goal of having students define the problem, we asked students to tell us what aspects of a flooding situation would most need to be addressed. And they came up with these 3 problems.
So they thought that, again, we thought that lending the students more agency was going to give them a better feel for what it's like to be an engineer, to see the situation as it's laid out, and then from that point to assess what they thought needed to happen. So the tasks that they came to us with and that we then centered the unit around were, they said that we needed to figure out a way either to collect the water that was on the land or to figure out a way to get rid of water that was on the land. They said that for the water sources that people actually drank from the potable water that people used, there was going to need to be a way to filter that water, to clean it again after the damage had been done because of the flooding. And they also decided that it was going to make sense that if a flood had happened, that the area should try to hypothesize a way to prevent future floods from happening. So those were the 3 sets of tasks that the students hypothesized and then set out to solve over the course of the unit.
Now on a sidebar, with all of the snow that we've had over the past month, my students actually remembered and they wanted to know, how can we clean the snow so that we can have a snowball fight and we can make snowmen, because now the snow is so dirty. So can we use the same techniques that we use in filtering the water system to filter the snow, which I was totally impressed.
It's a really cool thing. We partially chose the hydrological system because the students had been expressing a lot of, they talked a lot about Sandy, and about when we were talking about inclement weather, they talked a lot about, oh, I know what flooding was like, or I knew what it was like during the hurricane. And so we thought this would really give them a chance to see engineering in action in a sense that they had already experienced it. It would give them a chance to basically filter those experiences into an educational atmosphere.
Okay, the students who worked in groups were then informed of the materials they would be allowed to use. And we wanted the materials either that they actually used to be in water filtration and flood mitigation, like activated carbon and concrete. And in other instances, we had to find appropriate substitutes, like spoons for shovels, popsicle sticks for wooden slats. And we also tried to make the price of each material to its real life price so students could get a feel for real life constraints that engineers have to work with.
Right.
They had money.
Right. We tried to make this situation as analogous to real life as possible, and part of the real constraints that engineers work with are the fact that they have to use materials that cost a certain amount of money. So we did, again, some of the things like cotton balls. Obviously, engineers don't actually make water filters for entire cities with cotton balls, but we did have to do a little bit of substitution to make sure that what we could implement in the classroom is going to try to mimic as best what happened in real life. But some things like activated carbon actually are directly used in the filtration process, and so the students really did get a first-hand experience in sort of understanding how that's doled out. And they also saw activated carbon is expensive, so they really got to get a sense of what it is that engineers go through. And speaking of those budgetary constraints,
we limited the students to a $50 budget. Now they thought that was a lot of money and they thought they could go hog wild, but they soon found out that they didn't have enough money and they had to barter a lot of it, okay? And this was an in-class only design time, which took about a total of 6 hours across 4 weeks to complete the unit. And this was done to require students to think critically about the planning process before moving into actually creating their designs.
Right. So again, in regards to the scaffolding, we really wanted them to get a sense of the fact that not only do engineers have to think in terms of what is my problem, what do I need to solve my problem, but also what are my constraints, budgetary constraints, as we talked about. They were priced for the materials, but also the fact that we only gave them that in-class time, and it was a 4-week unit. So also there are time constraints to some of these problems, particularly with a natural disaster like this. Flood mitigation or response to a natural disaster has to be quick, and so engineers have to design solutions very quickly and work within those constraints. And we thought that setting up that 1 hour a week, 4-week constraint would give them some time to really get the sense of what it's like for engineers to come up with solutions to these things.
In the beginning, they were not getting the concept of, I don't have enough money. They thought that they could add some money, but they had to work with the money that they were given. And over the course of about 2 weeks, they finally got to the point where, okay, so I can trade with the neighbor, and they worked out, it worked very well.
Yes, the collaboration aspect of the interpersonal scaffolding actually worked out pretty well long term. Like students, they found ways, and they also realized we thought that was important, not just, we thought that was important in the context of scaffolding. The interpersonal skill of communication is important for everyone, but also because engineers are frequently collaborating and communicating with one another, it's important for them to be able to use those skills so that they can arrive at solutions. So we had what we called a unit-long storyline that was basically, we came up with a set of questions, again, that the students had designed for us, and then we went through and we sort of tried to set up how they would use claims, evidence, and reasoning to answer these questions and the activities that we would set up for them so that they could answer the questions. So probably the best example to use from this was the how do we best identify what material works best as a water filter? So we actually had students, one of the sub-activities was we actually gave them a graduated cylinder, and we gave them a certain amount of each filtration material, and we gave them a certain amount of dirty water, and we asked them to use we asked them to use the filter, and then after they'd filtered the water, use the graduated cylinder to show us how much of that water had been rendered potable by the end of it, to see which filtration material had actually yielded the most amount of clean water. Now we'll get to it in a minute, that quantitative scientific skills differ in elementary school classes in terms of getting them to pan out and actually work. So basically we broke this up into a 4-week unit, and the first week was introduction, just providing background, introducing the problem, outlining those constraints, and then assigning groups, which is in and of itself a very important interpersonal task again. Then we moved on to planning and prototyping, where we asked students to start conducting research on different filtration materials, conducting research on what actual engineers do, how people respond to floods, and then we asked them actually to submit designs for approval to us. We acted as a review board basically, and would have students come, and before they could actually begin building, we would have to approve both their design and the budget they had set up for their materials. And then after that, once they'd been approved, we asked them to move on to constructing their first prototype. The next week of lessons ended up segging into us having them test prototypes, and we actually designed what's called a reflection sheet. You'll get a chance to peek at it later on in the slides, but a reflection sheet where we actually, after students would do their first iteration of their prototype, we would hand them a sheet to ask them what had worked well and what didn't work, and what changes they had decided they were going to implement to their design after they had gone through the first iteration of it. And then they would go through the design process all over again. They would start designing, they'd have to reapprove and go on to prototyping again. And from that point forward, they were pretty much allowed to submit as many designs as they want to and keep going through the iterative process until they reached what they thought they wanted their final design to be.
And the good thing about this is that they didn't give up. Because if their project was rejected the first time, they went back and they tried to make it better. So I was prepared for the tears and, well, I don't want to do it anymore, but they just plowed right along.
It was a huge bout of perseverance for them to continue, and a huge bout, again, of collaboration. It was really difficult for each of them to come in with very disparate ideas about the way they thought they were going to solve this problem, and to have to really, they had to come to a consensus about what they were going to do. It was a lot of negotiation and compromise, but they ended up really being happy with the final results of their projects. And the other reason also that we asked them to submit designs to us, aside from us being able to sort of scaffold that process of just helping them figure out where they might need to make adjustments, was also because we thought scientific literacy, the ability to write and effectively communicate scientific ideas, we thought that was something we touched on quite a bit actually over the course of the semester in our seminar, and we thought transmitting that skill to the students was important because it's not only important to understand those scientific concepts, but also to be able to communicate them to another person. Again, that's a job of an engineer, is to translate what they've designed into something that's accessible and understandable for a large population. So then there were some setbacks, as there are with any task. So one of the setbacks this was something we really couldn't work around. A number of our students had to be pulled out of class for various academic reasons, so it ended up sort of shifting the structure of the groups, and it ended up making it so that some students actually hadn't had a chance at all to really participate in the design project, and that sort of led to us coming up with a separate short-term project where the students that didn't get to do the full design were actually responsible for doing the testing of each of the filtration materials so each group could have come to their own consensus about what they thought they were going to use in their design, but these students were specified to try to help the class as a whole understand which filtration material worked best. And then group dynamics is always an unforeseen setback with fourth graders. There was arguing, and I didn't like him at lunch today, and I don't want to work with him today during our group. And there was, why didn't she talk to me at recess? I'm going to move to a different group. And it's very difficult, one, because when you work on a design as a group, you have to finish the design as a group.
But they've learned, because we're in groups now, and so far so good. Nobody's at war.
And this definitely, this put us towards the brink of war, but we brought it back, and it remained about engineering. And so we really had to just kind of offhand come up with ideas to help scaffold those positive skills, to try and ask them questions, open questions, get them to communicate their ideas to each other to sort of ease tensions and allow them to work collaboratively. One of the unforeseen setbacks, sort of on my part, excessively confusing instructions. Aside from working with fourth graders, having to understand the fact that, again, those interpersonal skills have to be worked on, you also have to remember that there's a certain level of esotericism that can sometimes surround the information that engineers exchange between each other. And in presenting that information to them, sometimes I know I myself personally did not do the best job of unpacking that information beforehand. And so that ended up being that during the course of the project, we actually had to selectively modify some of those projects to make them more accessible for fourth graders, so that they could still get what the intent of that project was, but not be so confused by the wording that we were using. And then there was a preoccupation with auxiliary tasks. So students really liked it. They really liked the money. They felt very powerful. One of them was like, can I give you real money instead? They're like, I brought $1 from home. Like, can I pay for more materials? So that sort of almost detracted from them thinking about the fact that, yes, a budget is a component of what it takes to finish an engineering design project, but it is not the sole component, nor is it actually the primary component. So we really had to do a lot of rerouting students to staying on track. So student engagement, these are just some pictures of the students as they were at work. So there's Luna. Yeah, there's Luna. Is that Kayla with her? It looks like. Can't see. Yeah. Luna and Kayla, two students who actually, there were no problems there. That was a very good group, actually. A very nice cross-section of our class there. And then some of the materials that they used. So if you can see, the Tupperware container was actually, so that was our simulated river. We put soil in them and partitioned it, poured water, and it was really difficult making it so that it looked like a river basin. It was a lot of work, especially working in those tiny Glad plastic containers, but it worked out. And so our students actually were very engaged with the entire process. They were very present. They were very much actively seeking answers to the information. And we set up a number of opportunities for them. Sometimes we did an activity where we sort of, instead of forcing them to read materials, we laid out some scientific research materials that they could choose from. And they didn't read all of it, but they were engaged enough to figure out that when they realized I need an answer to something and I don't have the answer, they did go to those materials. So some more pictures of student engagement. We had students rotate through. Another one of the skills we thought was really important was being able to use scientific measuring equipment. So the two pieces of equipment we thought were most integral to this project were the triple beam balance for actually massing out the amounts of materials they were using, and also the graduated cylinder that we mentioned earlier in terms of being able to measure the amount of water they were filtering. And so we actually allowed students to do a rotation basis of one student would be in charge of helping another student figure out how to use the triple beam balance, and an effort to sort of get students to teach those skills to each other. So here's just some samples of student work, some clues charts to assess their knowledge, what they were learning, the evidence they'd found, things they were still wondering about, and some scientific principles. And so I think this is Melissa's. She knew that there was a flood, and she was learning that she could build a machine to get the water out of New York. And she wanted to figure out a way to get the water out. And so some things she was still wondering about were, where do hurricanes and tornadoes, whether or not that's come from, wasn't necessarily clear, but her last question, her scientific principles, she said we had a test on the water cycle, which they definitely learned some scientific principles there. Yeah. This is one of the designs that a student had come up with. We allowed them some space to sort of creatively jot down what they thought their final design would look like. Here, I think this one's Kayla. She really loves science, as you can see. I heart science on the side. And also, they had some really interesting, elaborate designs in regards to the things they set up. They would really, and they labeled these pretty clearly in terms of showing us, like, this is their cup, and that's their filtration material, and it's going to drip down. They're going to use the spoon to catch it. So they really got creative with it. It was super interesting getting to watch the cogs turn their head and kind of see how that worked out.
And to put it in sequence and the things that they needed to do, so that they could follow the directions and somebody else could follow their steps.
Yeah, and so actually our final component of the task was that they did a share out. So each group we went around and we had them demonstrate how their flood mitigation, their tiny microcosmic system worked. And so they would tell us what they had done, how they got to their design, and basically we got to do a chance for them to share out what challenges they had experienced. So we had students share if they had had similar challenges, and we thought that this was an integral part basically of the experience, because we also thought it's really important for engineers as they're coming back for reflection to reflect with each other. And it's actually, we also are reading a text where it's called the initiate, respond, evaluate model, where students actually, they hear other students' thoughts, they hear them out, and then they evaluate them and respond to them. So they get a chance to not only talk about what they were doing, but also get to internalize the work that other students were doing. So just some more samples of student work. This was a slightly less detailed design with just water. A dam. We actually didn't tell students to make a dam. That was one of the things we thought was imperative, was that if they wanted to come to the conclusion that a dam was the way to prevent floods, that would be on their own. And actually, some students came up with other solutions, and some students naturally came to the conclusion that after they had done research, that they thought a dam would be the best way to prevent this. So in terms of solving the problems, this student, I think Melissa again, said she could use a dam to return the water to the river, and that the water would not go into the cities with her dam, and that it wouldn't go over the dam if she had a dam. And so she talked about the materials she would need, and she set up her budget, which was $62. She did have to revise that since she only had 50, but that was basically how that process worked out. And so in terms of the data they got to collect, it did not work out the way we wanted it to. They really didn't come up with produce as much quantitative data as we would have wanted or imagined. They turned out a little differently than planned. Again, students, with the transitory nature of some of the students leaving and not being there or present for some of the lessons that we were teaching, it made it difficult for some of the students to feel like they had been properly introduced to the use of some of those scientific materials. And also, again, going back to what we talked about earlier with some of the dense instructions, some of the students had been lost over the course of what it was they were supposed to be doing. And then, as happens in a classroom, some directions only got selectively enforced as we were rotating around the classroom checking in on students, which was another important aspect of we thought the process was constant monitoring and being able to scaffold those skills by circling around the room. And then we had students do a self-assessment and reflection at the end of their engineering experience, and also they did reflections after each iteration of their project. So here we had students do a reflection on their group dynamics, because we thought that was important, and also how their group dynamics had affected their ability to complete the design. So here each student got to, we partitioned the page into 4 parts, and each student got to draw or write down what part they had contributed to their design project. So we could really get an idea of how well the groups had worked together, and really the components that each person gotten to contribute to the overall project.
Who did the most work and who just sat back and
yes.
Posted.
And we got to see that after reviewing all the sheets, there really was high student engagement across the board. The students really did get a chance, all of them, to contribute to the project and also get a lot out of the experience. And in regards to the reflection sheet, we had students basically go back and say, how much clean water did our design produce? What worked? What didn't work? Some people, nothing spilled. That was what worked, and the group working together was well, but they did end up with the same design, and they said that, why does this activity relate back to what we learned about weather and the water cycle? This person said, it was about. And then this person addressed it to me, which is really nice. And then revisiting the standards and the goals, we really did get a chance to sort of hit upon each of these that we had aimed for. They did design the model, they defined the problems on their own, they did hypothesize multiple solutions, each of which we got a chance to peek at as we did a review, and they carried out quantitative tests despite the fact that the tests didn't come back with quantitative data. In regards to those positive interpersonal skills and being able to apply previous knowledge and support experimentally attained evidence, all of this was also evident after hearing their share-outs and also seeing their reflection sheets. So in reflection on our part, we did feel that most standards and goals are met. Our assessment, again, with the quantitative analysis, there were things left to be desired, but there was evidence of student learning, and there was room for improvement in regards to better group-by-group scaffolding. That's an important thing, being able to spend more time with each group, be able to really hear their ideas and shape them a little more. Fewer, clearer, more concise directions all around.
And time management was an issue, yes.
We had a really limited amount of time, really, to execute this. I was only in the classroom for basically the very last part of the day. There was pack up, there were things.
And then that was the time when they were pulled out also.
Yeah, so it ended up putting a time constraint we hadn't foreseen. We also wanted more checkpoints for student progress, so to go through and more frequently set up opportunities for ourselves to see how students were doing. And then a little more rigorous adherence to the parameters. Again, some of those directions only ended up selectively enforced. That ended up meaning no quantitative data, so we were hoping maybe in the future, if this were to happen again, to enforce those directions, and just generally preparing for the unexpected. Thank you.
And you feel like, oh, what I said really is totally out of the box. So you just kind of have to put a little soft spin to it.
Yeah.
But in the same token, steering them back to where they need to be.
Yeah, you validate the thought process, and then you help scaffold the scientific principles to help them really figure out what it is they're trying to do.
I have two questions.
Sure.
The first one is this just an experiment of the CER, or is it just one of a lot of projects that students do at school?
Oh, so specifically in the context of the course, I guess, everything that all of the assignments I basically had as a student teacher revolved around the CER framework. So basically every activity I went into the classroom with was geared towards that. It was centered around that. But in regards to, I didn't do all their classroom teaching, so.
So it does continue over, and like I said, it continued over after Mr. Jacob left. We are still doing the CER.
And the second question is, what are some of the solutions that you come up with for students that they didn't come up with data at the end? So do you think it's, do you have solutions in mind, or another question will be, what are some of the reasons that you might think it resolved no data at the end?
So that happened, I think that one was really linked to the time management thing. We really, in terms of we did short group by group lessons on the triple beam balance, and I think had we had the opportunity to maybe dedicate an entire day of the class just to working with scientific equipment, we might have been able to sort of get away from that problem of some of the students really not being engaged or knowing how to do that specific aspect. I think it really did boil down to how we just had a chance really to spend more time with that. Students need exposure to something to feel comfortable doing it and to feel like they can produce those results. And some of the students did feel that comfortable. Some of the students caught on very quickly, but I think class-wide, it would have needed to be an endeavor that we just took on for longer. And I think that if we'd had more opportunities to reinforce that, it would have turned out better.
One of the things I think really worked well, which I was quite pleased with, is that they helped each other. Those students that really caught on to the triple beam balance, they did help the other students, and they were receptive to it, because sometimes my class doesn't want help from their peers. They don't always have a fondness for each other.
Poor Dulce.
Yes. So that helped with, peer tutoring.
Yes.
So at the end, during the reflection process, was there some time taken for students to consider how their personal engineering project is like what engineers actually do out in the field? So I see like lots of this project was done, okay, this is, like, engineers need to consider all these factors. So were they then asked in, like, reflecting how their work was similar to authentic practice of engineers?
We actually did, yeah. So at the culmination of it, after we'd done all the share outs, we actually did a brief. We kind of, this might have been a lot. We did like that tiny part where we talked about like FEMA and like what FEMA does in regards to a flood mitigation and natural disaster response. And so we actually did get a chance to really have a dialogue about what it is that real engineers do. And we talked about a number of the different, in terms of, we got a chance to sort of talk to the students about, we gave you the chance to do whatever you wanted to. Now here's a list of all, here's a list of all the things real engineers do. And so we got to go through and sort of show them, these are the solutions a lot of other engineers have come up with. These are ones that have failed. And this, again, we talked about FEMA, again, might have been too much for a fourth grade class, but we talked about how real emergency management works. So we really wanted them to get a feel for the fact that this was not just an isolated fourth grade project, but one that, taken to the right scale, could actually be a real engineering project.
I'm Sherilyn Banks, and I'm the third grade teacher at St. Charles Borromeo School. You have to excuse me because I'm a little hoarse. What I did prior to when Allison came, I was teaching a lesson about earth science, erosion, weathering, and such. So when Allison came, we sat down and discussed what we were going to do as a total project for the engineering piece. So.
Right. In my first day there was actually a bit of an introduction to science and engineering for the students. So we started off by asking them, what is science? And got answers like the plants, the globe, the food chain, bugs, and TV. When asked what science means to them, they answered technology, the past, helping people, animals, trees, and the ocean. And when they were asked what engineering meant, they answered with inventor, brainstorm, and build. So we really got a sense of the knowledge that they were coming into this with. And now we're going to take you through our semester briefly and then talk about our engineering design unit. We decided early on that, well, we actually began with an engineering challenge right off the bat, where the students were asked to construct a structure at least 20 inches tall with limited materials, including 100 index cards, tape, a pencil, paper clips, and rubber bands. It was also meant to hold a certain amount of weight, but we didn't quite get to that point. Some of them, you can see, started building in very different ways. Some built up without having something in the middle to support their structure. So it was really interesting to see how they changed their designs and ultimately how they dealt with engineering when we revisited it at the end of the semester.
Right, and with this piece is, you know, explaining to the students trial and error. It's going to collapse, so you have to try again to try to fix it the way, you know, with the materials that you have. That's what engineers do. They're going to build something, it's not going to work right. You got to go back to the drawing board and you got to redo it. So that's what they were doing here, playing around with it. You got to play.
Again, we can see them testing out different strategies. And we decided early on that our final engineering design unit would ask the students to create earthquake-proof houses. And from that moment, we decided once we started our science lessons that we would have an overarching narrative of earth science to introduce them to the engineering design unit. We started with a lesson on rock identification and moved on to erosion, where the students shook bags of sugar cubes to see physical erosion in action and shook them for 1 minute increments, made observations about the changes to the shape and measurements and size of the cube, and recorded those observations.
And that was a very good activity because they can see it up front. What happens to erosion with the little sugar cubes, and they're shaking it, they're shaking it and shaking it, and then, oh, it's getting smaller. I see the dust, and yeah. Well, that's what happens with erosion over time. So they were seeing it.
And this lesson, like our others, was geared for the students to be able to make those observations and use that as evidence to support a claim, which in the end, their claim was that erosion makes rocks smaller, smoother, and rounder. We moved on to a lesson about rock layers and stratification, where the students layered their own rock cores with fossils and different types of sediments to learn about the age of rocks. And moved on to plate tectonics and continental drift. Then finally to earthquakes, which was what we were working towards this entire time, a lesson on earthquakes where they could learn about where earthquakes occur, why earthquakes occur, and a little bit about earthquake damage so that they would know more while approaching the engineering design unit. The engineering design unit challenged the students to design and construct a house that could withstand the force of an earthquake using only the materials provided. The earthquake being a shake table that we made out of 2 pieces of cardboard with 4 tennis balls in between, held together by rubber bands that simulated the movements of the earthquake. And the materials they were provided were 100 small popsicle sticks, 30 large popsicle sticks, 20 pipe cleaners, 10 index cards, 10 paper clips, different sized rubber bands, different sized cardboard pieces, and a small section of a paper towel roll, and unlimited tape.
And this is where the process come in, where they're doing it in groups. And then you can hear the one that's overarching everybody else. Let's do this, let's do. Then you hear the group over there that's kind of quiet, but they're getting their things done. So you know you're listening, and it gets kind of busy. But overall, after their ending projects was pretty good.
And we worked through this in 5 weeks. In the first week, the students were just asked to brainstorm and complete introductory activities. In the second, they created more introductory activities, which were actually the family engineering night activities that they would be showing their family and friends the next week. In the third week, they got a chance to brainstorm again with what they had learned from the previous activities and redesign and begin construction. In the fourth week, they constructed their buildings and tested them out. And in the fifth week, they were asked to bring an item from home so that they could revise, improve, and retest their structures. So in lesson 1, the first week, they were simply asked to brainstorm initially as a class and individually. Throughout the entire semester, they were working in groups of ranging from 2 to 5 students, and for the engineering design unit, they were working in groups of 2 or 3 students. Then they completed 3 introductory activities, all about that base, how tall is too tall, and shape stability. Our hope was that the experiences with the activities would inform their decision making when they planned their earthquake-proof houses. So each activity was designed in a way that they could use lessons from it to inform their decisions. So in all about that base, they were making structures with different size bases. As you can see, I think this one has a large base and that one over there has no base, and then they were simulating simple earthquakes by shaking the paper that it was on to see if it would stand or fall. In the end, we wanted them to see that the larger the base, the more stable the structure.
Right, and this was before they could use the materials to make their house proof for an earthquake. They were just playing around with the cubes and stuff and building and shaking and just see how it's going to work out.
Oh, I'll go back. And for the how tall is too tall, they were asked to make structures of different heights with the same size base so that they could then shake them and see that the taller it gets, the less stable it becomes. So that could inform their decisions. And for the third one, it was the shape stability to see that, again, though they weren't learning these exact concepts, that buildings with more mass on the bottom were more stable than those with more mass on top. In the second lesson, they continued to do activities that might inform their decisions in the future. They were not yet working with our materials and didn't even go back to the brainstorming process. They did 3 activities. One was arches, glue is the clue, and solid ground. And we hoped that by participating in the engineering activities, they would gain an understanding of strong structural features that would be helpful in the future for their designs. These activities would also be the family engineering night activities that the 3rd grade students presented, so we wanted them to become professionals in their activities so that they could watch their parents and families and friends do it and explain to them why some things worked and others didn't. In the arches activity, the students were instructed to try out different bridge styles and test their strength. One was a flat bridge across the 2 cans of tomatoes and see how many pennies they could hold. And throughout the entire process, they were recording their observations and using those as evidence to make claims at the end. They then tried it with an arch and saw how many pennies that could hold.
And they were really excited with this. Oh, 20 pennies can hold this. Oh no, mine can hold 30. You know, so it's back and forth. But they really enjoyed that one.
With Glue is the Clue was a similar one where they were testing if index cards that were glued together were stronger than those that were not glued together, and they were asked to think about why those that were glued together might be stronger than those that weren't. And again, we're recording and drawing conclusions about their experiment. In solid ground, the students were asked to try to push in blocks into different types of foundations. One was modeled to be a smooth gravel. We used beans. One was rough gravel, which we used granola for, and the third was sand, which we used sand for. They then tested each one and made a claim about which would be the best to build your house on in the case of an earthquake. In lesson 3, we finally went back to our initial challenge, and with the activities that the students had done, they were asked to brainstorm again using what they had learned, see if their ideas had changed at all, if the shape of their house or the height had changed, and they began construction. The students redesigned their earthquake-proof house plans, incorporating the information they received from the previous activities, and began building. So initially at this stage, they had the materials that I had listed before. Most of them started right away with the popsicle sticks, trying to tape them together, make a floor. Was a big one. And that actually led to us giving them more materials. We gave them larger pieces of cardboard so that they might be able to build it up a little bit more instead of working on the floor and the ground level. In lesson 4, we continued construction. They were working together this whole time again, and at the end of class, we tested the houses at our shake table and received some explanations as to the students' design choices. Here you can see some of the students' designs. We're testing them at the shake table over here.
And this was the fun part. They wanted to see if their house would stay up. The shaking, how long? Oh, well, mine stayed up 5 minutes or something. What was yours? But it was interesting with that.
And after that lesson, they were asked again to bring some item from home that they could use to improve their design. One student brought in her notebook that she used as a support for her earthquake-proof house. Another brought a pencil box for the same purpose. Many students brought extra tape, which was a good one.
Yes. Because they knew their house was falling apart, so the extra tape was supporting.
And so here you can just see them explaining their designs at the shake table with their completed projects. And the best way to show the student learning and the student growth would be to compare their designs at the beginning and after they had improved their final product. So Dallas and Mackenzie, Dallas said, "The first time we started to make our house, it was going to be square, but it didn't work out for us, so we decided to make it something like a triangle." She may not have even noticed it, but she was using those activities that we did together where we saw that the mass greater at the bottom than the top was more stable than the other way. And Mabai and Prince, you can definitely see growth in these.
Yes, and they had a hard time because they would always come to me or Allison and say, oh, I don't know what we're going to do. It always falls apart. Okay, just take your time. You're an engineer. It's going to happen. Just go back to the drawing board and you work on it. Okay. And then look what happened at the final project.
And this actually all came together on the very last day for them after their previous design kind of crumbled on the shake table. Mabai said, we made this house and it's a synonym of Dallas and Mackenzie's house, a little bit shorter. It's really small and it can stay up because it's small. Again, using those lessons that they had learned in the activities that taller is not always better. And the students exclaimed that it's not even shaking when we tested it out. Jade and Kayla, again, they said we made the safe house because if we added the walls and shake it, it doesn't really fall down because we tested it. We encouraged the students to test it continuously, even if it wasn't at the shake table, at their own desk, you know. Kind of, I saw them shaking it upside down and like throwing it around. Jade said, when we got it back, it was flat, so we took the tape off and everything we did before and we just added walls. So again, the improvement was a large part for them. People said how strong it was. And Hanley, Frida, and Jada, they ended up with a final product that had 2 walls, but were able to explain it, which we thought was very impressive. Frida said, it has no walls because the people are going to live under. If the earthquake happens, it can only shake these 2 walls and it can't hurt the people. So we felt that they were using evidence from testing it out to make a claim that maybe it's better if the house doesn't have walls. Yeah. Jada said the other house that we used was a little messed up, so we started over and did it a different way. Natalie and LaSalle said, if the ground shakes, nothing will break. Because I put a roof and we put lots of doors. Like in case something crashes down, you can go out the other door. But again, they seem like a little silly to us because we know that maybe this wouldn't work in a real earthquake, but to be able to explain the decisions that they were making was very important. And LaSalle said, we stapled it so it would stay still to add doors and to make it stable, and to add more tape to make it balanced, and add more pipe cleaners and add more tape around it to make it still. Again, just really justifying those decisions with the evidence of their tests.
And the whole idea with them working together is come with that critical thinking of when they gather up all the materials and how they can come and construct something. So that helped.
And Marche and Penda said, we started to put some popsicle sticks on the walls so it could stay straight, and we have a lot of tape. Didn't have a roof, but it was very stable, and they actually had maybe started with a better design than the others, that they didn't change it much, but they were able to explain all their decisions. And when we asked the students again at the end of the semester what engineering was, they had some different answers than brainstorming and inventing. They said, it might not come out as you want it, so you might have to make some changes. It takes more time than you ever thought. That's what I learned about engineering, that it's hard to build something, but you accomplish something. It might not turn out as you want, but if you can do something with it, it could make good cost. I learned if you build a lot of things and you know how to fix things, you are a master engineer. And if they tried it in an earthquake and it fell down, but not all of the house fell down, you don't have to tear the whole house down. The pieces that made your house stay strong, you could use them for the next house to make the next house even stronger. So their ideas and the pictures from the beginning and the end of the engineering design unit really show the student growth and the student learning over the semester.
Yeah, and they're still growing now.
Right, and even through the design unit, though we didn't have the worksheets like we had throughout the semester that asked the students to come up with evidence and claims, they used evidence to justify every decision they make and made claims about their houses that way. And that's it.
for Allison and Sherilyn.
Were there ever moments that, like something that they learned in the research, they would do the opposite of, and like the opposite would actually work out, and it's like, yeah, it's not supposed to work out, but it kind of did, and like, how would you explain that?
That's funny. I think I experienced that observing them a lot in the activities we did for engineering design, family engineering night, where the instructions told the students to put, you know, it was one where there were 2 cans of tomatoes and they were told to put the paper on top. And then they started piling the pennies on each side of the can, so it was hard to say, you know, yeah, like it's hard to tell them they're not doing it right when the way they're doing it is definitely working, but they're not getting to the answer that will help them. So that was difficult, but I think we had to say, maybe you should read the instructions a little more carefully, or I think we should try by putting them in the middle so it's a fair test for both.
Did you guys show the beginning and the end result to the, like you showed another presentation, but did you have the kids look at the beginning result and the end result?
Oh, I did, in the classroom.
And what did they say to that?
Their thoughts was, wow, you mean I started like this? and now look at me. Oh, okay, so I can build, you know. Because in the beginning, like you said, they started out, you know, not knowing much, but the end process, when they saw it, it's like, okay, I see. All right, this is not so bad after all. Yeah, I did. I showed it to them.
And I think to see how far they came from the first engineering challenge was really huge for them.
Yes, because the beginning they were, you know, they were just thinking about what to do and how to do it. I guess they wanted to be perfect, but you know, you can't. Everybody is an individual, so you know, you do the best you can with what you have. You only have these certain materials. You don't have anything else to work with. So you have to plan, organize, get your thoughts together, and build something with what you have.
You alluded a couple times to the fact that you had these 3 activities you had them do. You weren't quite sure whether they actually contributed to their designs or not. I don't know if the kids explicitly said, because of that, it's that base. And I guess my question is, would you believe that they may have come up with those even if you had directed it up front? Would they have come to that through their process and maybe wanted to go back and test shapes and test bases and maybe reverse that process?
I'm sure they could have. You know, they made a lot of changes on their own that we didn't encourage them to do, and I mean, I like to think that they did gain something from the activities that they did, but it's very possible that they could have come up with it on their own. I remember the first brainstorm that one of the students did was a triangle, though, and it was funny, it was the smaller one that was a synonym for the larger one, and he didn't know why he designed it that way. It was supposed to be like a circus tent, and you know, it took him several tries in the actual process to get there again. So it's very possible that they could have gotten there on their own.
I noticed in your presentation and in the previous one, there was like a lot of focus on how the students were able to collaborate and kind of challenge each other's ideas. And I was wondering if you also gave them kind of an opportunity to be in conversation with their own ideas and like challenge themselves, and how you felt that played into this whole scheme.
Yes, when they were in their little groups, they did communicate with one another, their different ideas, but then they had to come together to figure out, well, we have these materials, we're gonna have to come up with something, so let's plan. Maybe like Kayla and Jade. Kayla, maybe you can do the floor. Think of a design for the floor. Jade, you come up with something to cover the floor. So they had to do that amongst themselves. You know, talk about planning, who's gonna do what. So everybody has a little piece of their little project.
And I think the constant testing and retesting made them constantly challenge their own ideas. That something didn't work and they would have to go back to the drawing board.